How much truth can one voice speak before the whole room trembles? At Velvet Ivy, a rooftop palace where dinners cost rent money and silence was part of the decor, that question was about to be answered by the last person anyone expected, a black waitress holding a silver tray. Layla Brooks knew her place, or rather, the place others forced her into. She was 24, brown skin smooth as polished walnut, eyes warm but trained to lower when power walked by. The uniform fit her like a disguise. Black apron, white shirt, smile stitched on. To the guests, she was background music with legs. To herself, she was a tight coil of discipline wrapped around secrets they'd never imagine. Fluency in Japanese, a college dream on pause, and a mother's medical bills that refused to stop arriving. The night Bryant Maxwell arrived, the air shifted. He didn't enter rooms, he consumed them. Navy suit tailored within an inch of arrogance, crimson tie knifing straight down his chest, cufflinks that winked like they had their own PR agents. Behind him, a pack of lawyers and his translator filed in. At the far end sat Kenji Nakamura, dignified as stone lantern light, a man who had nothing to prove and therefore everything to teach. Between them, contracts worth $500 million lay in their leather folders like live ammunition. Layla floated with her tray, trained to disappear. But her eyes, sharper than she liked to admit, landed on the Japanese text in Nakamura's folder. One line snagged her like barbed wire. In the event of a 5% market fluctuation, administrative control of Nakamura Holdings' U.S. assets transfers to Maxwell Capital. Her breath stalled. That clause wasn't in the English draft. It was a trap written in kanji, invisible to everyone at the table, except her. She told herself to move, pour the wine, collect the tips, keep her mother's lights on for another month. That's what smart girls did in New York. They survived by staying quiet. But her grandfather's voice rose up from memory, gravel, and wisdom. If you know a man's words, you know his heart. And when you see a lie, you don't let it pass. The Dallas investor's chuckle sliced through her hesitation. She walks like she's auditioning for a music video, he sneered, loud enough for all to hear. Another man piled on. Bet she couldn't find Tokyo on a map. Maxwell smirked, dismissive. She's here to pour, not to think. That was the moment the coil inside Layla finally snapped. She set the tray down on a side table with steady hands, turned to the contract, and said words that detonated the room. That's not what it says. The jazz trio stuttered into silence. Forks froze. Every head swung toward her. Not the lawyers, not the executives, the waitress. And yet, her voice carried like a verdict. Maxwell's head whipped toward her, his smirk evaporating. "Excuse me?" His voice was silk stretched over glass, smooth until it cut. Layla didn't flinch. Her eyes stayed locked on the contract. The Japanese version doesn't match the English. It isn't protective language. It's theft in disguise. A ripple of disbelief ran around the table. One lawyer cleared his throat, ready to swat her down. But even he didn't sound sure. The translator stared at his own hands, sweat blooming under his collar. Bryant Maxwell rose from his chair. The leather groaned like it knew better. "You are a waitress," he said. Each word dropped like a hammer. "You pour drinks. You smile. You vanish. You don't interpret contracts worth $500 million. His words tried to box her back into invisibility, but Layla's chest burned with something larger than fear. She thought of her mother at home, counting out pills like they were treasure. She thought of her grandfather's tired eyes, telling her that silence was complicity. and she thought of every table where she'd smiled through insults just to keep her job. Not tonight. She turned her gaze, not on Maxwell, but on Kenji Nakamura. Calm, unreadable, he sat with his hands folded, eyes narrowed in thought. When he finally spoke, it was in measured Japanese, his tone gentle but commanding. "What exactly did you read?" Layla's heart kicked hard, but her voice held. She bowed her head slightly, every syllable precise. Clause 7 states, if the Asian market drops more than 5%, Nakamura Holdings' U.S. assets transfer to Maxwell Capital's administrative control. That condition does not appear in the English version. The interpreter looked like he'd swallowed poison. His lips trembled. Bryant snarled, "Tell them she's lying." But the man broke. His voice cracked. "She's telling the truth." The room imploded into silence. Forks rested. Breaths caught. Investors shifted in their seats as if trying to escape the weight of it. Maxwell's face flushed crimson, the mask slipping. He spat venom at his translator. "You coward! I paid you," then stopped, realizing too late what he'd confessed out loud. Layla felt every eye swing back to her, some curious, some hostile, but none dismissive anymore. Her knees wobbled under the weight of their attention, but she planted her heels and stood straighter. Nakamura leaned back in his chair, studying her with an expression that was not surprise but recognition, as if he'd been waiting for the truth and didn't care where it came from. He turned his head toward Bryant, his voice now colder than steel. "You invited me here under false pretenses." Bryant's charm cracked like cheap porcelain. "Kenji, listen, this is being twisted, blown out of proportion. She doesn't know what she's—" But Nakamura was no longer listening. His eyes returned to Layla, and for the first time all night, respect moved in the silence like fresh air. Layla's pulse thundered in her ears. She wanted to collapse, to disappear into the safety of the kitchen, but she also felt something else, a strange lightness, the weight of years of swallowed words lifting all at once. Her tray sat forgotten at her side, the wine bottle still unopened. Yet she knew instinctively, tonight, it wasn't wine she had delivered. It was the truth. And truth, once spoken, couldn't be poured back into the bottle. The moment the translator admitted she was right, the air inside Velvet Ivy fractured. Money men who had spent decades controlling rooms suddenly found themselves in one they could not command. The clink of silverware had stopped. The jazz trio in the corner had gone mute, their saxophonist's cheeks still puffed, but unwilling to play another note. Bryant Maxwell's face drained from crimson to a shade best reserved for a storm cloud. He tried to recover, pacing the length of the table like a trapped animal searching for an escape hatch. His words came in a rush, sharp, uneven, desperate. "This is a misunderstanding, a clerical error. We'll resolve it immediately." But no one moved to help him. Not the lawyers, not the assistant glued to her tablet, not the nervous investors now shifting as if the floor beneath them had grown unstable. Kenji Nakamura remained perfectly still. That, more than shouting, killed the room. Silence had weight when it came from a man like him. He reached forward, closed the leather folder with a soft click, and set it aside like spoiled food. Then he rose. "Bryant Maxwell," he said in calm, accented English, "this dinner is over." The words weren't loud, but they landed with finality, a closing gavel. He bowed slightly to the room, everyone except Bryant, then turned toward Layla. His gaze lingered on her longer than etiquette required. He offered her the smallest of nods, as if acknowledging not just her presence, but her courage. And then he left, his entourage following in a ripple of expensive shoes and hushed Japanese. For a full 10 seconds, the room was frozen. Then voices erupted. One investor muttered, "God almighty, we're finished!" Another whispered frantically into his phone. Chairs scraped, papers shuffled, the dinner dissolved into chaos. Bryant tried to shout over it, "Stay seated! The deal's not dead. He'll come back." But his voice, once magnetic, now sounded like static. No one listened. Layla remained standing, her hands still trembling, her tray abandoned on the sideboard. For the first time in her life, she wasn't invisible, but the spotlight felt like a burning lamp. Some guests stared with awe, others with suspicion, but none dared dismiss her. Brian's eyes found her like daggers. He pointed across the table. "You think this makes you a hero? You've destroyed months of work. Do you know what you've cost me?" Layla's throat tightened, but she forced her voice steady. "I didn't cost you anything, Mr. Maxwell. You did that yourself." The reply, quiet as it was, cut sharper than his rage. His jaw twitched, his fists balled, but he couldn't strike her here, not in front of the wreckage of his empire. So he turned, stormed out, and slammed the oak doors behind him. The storm he left behind, however, was only beginning. Layla didn't sleep that night. After her shift, she walked home through the Manhattan chill, the city buzzing oblivious to the earthquake that had struck inside Velvet Ivy. Her phone vibrated nonstop, texts from coworkers, missed calls from the manager, even anonymous numbers flashing like warning sirens. She ignored them all. At home, her mother was waiting. Gloria Brooks was a woman carved from endurance, her hair pulled back tight, her hands scarred from years of work. She looked up from the kitchen table where bills lay spread like playing cards. "You're late," she said, voice calm but heavy with concern. "And you look like you've seen a ghost." Layla wanted to explain, but how do you tell your mother you just detonated a billionaire in front of half of Wall Street? She sank into a chair, pressing her palms to her eyes. Something happened at work. Something big Gloria waited. She had learned long ago not to rush her daughter. "I told the truth," Layla whispered finally, "and it might have destroyed him." Her mother's brows drew together. "Destroyed who?" Layla hesitated. Then, with a breath that felt like stepping off a ledge, she told her everything. The contract, the translation, the explosion in the dining room. Gloria listened in silence, her expression shifting from worry to disbelief to something close to pride. When Layla finished, the room was quiet except for the hum of the old refrigerator. "You did right," Gloria said softly. "Your grandfather would have told you the same. Truth is never the wrong answer." Even when it cost, Layla nodded, but her stomach twisted. "It could cost more than my job, Mom. Maxwell doesn't lose quietly. He'll come for me." Gloria reached across the table, took her daughter's hand. "Then let him. You've got something men like him will never understand. You've got honor, and honor doesn't scare easy." The next morning, Manhattan woke to headlines. $500 million deal collapses in Manhattan showdown. Waitress exposes translation trickery at Velvet Ivy. Maxwell Capital faces fraud allegations. Her name wasn't printed yet, but the story spread like spilled ink. Anonymous sources spoke of a young black server who had revealed the deception. On social media, speculation ran wild. Some called her a hero. Others accused her of seeking attention. By noon, Maxwell Capital stock had slipped 14%. Investors demanded answers. Board members scheduled an emergency session. Bryant Maxwell, once untouchable, now looked cornered. And Layla, who had walked home in the cold like a ghost, now found herself thrust into a storm that didn't care if she wanted it or not. The second day felt like living inside a storm cloud. Everywhere Layla turned, subway ads, taxi radios, scrolling news tickers, there was the same name in bold white letters, Maxwell. Bryant's empire was crumbling in real time. Stock free fell another 10 points before lunch. Investors bled millions on paper and howled for someone's head. The board convened in a glass tower that afternoon, their voices rising, their patience snapping. Inside those walls, Bryant roared like a wounded animal. He threw charts, waved contracts, cursed traitors. "This is temporary. Nakamura will come back. He always comes back for profit. And if not, we'll sue him in U.S. courts. The waitress is nothing. She's nobody." But the board wasn't listening anymore. They weren't thinking about the waitress. They were thinking about their money, about their names in headlines beside the word fraud. That evening, leaks confirmed what Layla had already known. The translator had confessed, emails had surfaced, and the bribe was documented. By day 3, Maxwell Capital had lost nearly half its value. The man who once strutted into Velvet Ivy with a red tie and a smirk now found doors slamming in his face. Senators didn't return calls. Lawyers refused retainers. Even the restaurants he once owned tables in whispered his name with pity. Layla, meanwhile, became the ghost in every rumor. Paparazzi camped outside Velvet Ivy. Cameras lingered on every server's face, hoping to find the woman who spoke. Customers whispered. Managers barked orders with panic in their eyes. Finally, her name leaked. Layla Brooks. Reporters swarmed her walk to the subway. Microphones thrust forward, questions pelting her like hailstones. "Did you plan this? Are you working for Nakamura? Are you prepared for Maxwell's lawsuit?" Layla kept her head down, clutching her coat tight, but fear chased her like a shadow. At night, she double-checked the locks, listened for phantom footsteps on the stairs. Hate mail slipped under her door, printed threats, ugly words. But there were also letters, handwritten ones, folded carefully, slipped through the restaurant's back alley entrance. "Thank you for speaking up. My father lost his pension in a deal like this. You did what no one else could." They stacked slowly on her kitchen table, like a counterweight against the venom. Gloria watched her daughter move between terror and pride. "They're scared of you, baby," she said one night, smoothing Layla's curls like she used to when she was a child. "That's why they bark so loud. Don't you forget that." On the 4th evening, a black sedan slid to the curb outside their apartment. Layla froze at the window. The last time she had seen a car like that, Bryant had been inside. She almost didn't open the door, but the man who stepped out was not Maxwell. It was Kenji Nakamura. No entourage this time, no translators, no cameras. Just him, his posture straight, his face calm. Gloria answered the door first, startled, then ushered him inside as if hosting royalty in their modest living room. The scent of oolong tea clung to his coat, faint but grounding. Layla stood rigid, unsure whether to bow, to speak, or to apologize. Mr. Nakamura solved the tension with a small gesture. He extended a thin envelope, resting it on the table between them. "For you," he said, simply. Layla hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a photograph, old, creased, black and white. 2 young men sat side by side in a ruined farmhouse. One was black, uniform smudged with dirt. The other was Japanese, bandaged, weary, but alive. Both were smiling. Her breath caught. She knew that jawline, that steady calm in the eyes. "My grandfather," she whispered. Nakamura nodded slowly. "And mine. Satoru Nakamura. They met in war when kindness should have been impossible. Your grandfather saved him. He carried this photo every day of his life." Silence filled the room, heavy with history. Gloria pressed a hand to her mouth, tears forming. Layla traced the edges of the photograph as though it might vanish. "I have searched decades for Henry Brooks," Nakamura continued softly. "Letters crossed oceans, unanswered. We thought the debt would never be repaid. But tonight, his granddaughter honored him again." Layla swallowed hard. "I didn't do it for legacy. I just couldn't stay quiet." "That," Nakamura said, his gaze steady, "is why it matters." He leaned back, folding his hands. "Miss Brooks, the world will try to use you now. Media, politicians, even my competitors. They will call you pawn or liar or savior. But I see something else. I see honor. And honor is rare, rarer than wealth." He paused, letting the words settle like stones on water. "The Nakamura Foundation would like to sponsor your education. Any university, any program, full scholarship. And we will offer your mother a position in our New York office, stable and fair. This is not payment. It is a continuation of gratitude, one generation to the next." The room felt smaller, the air thicker. Layla's mind spun. Scholarship. A future she'd once shoved into a drawer because bills came first. Her mother, working without rest for decades, finally offered dignity. She wanted to cry, to shout, to ask why me, but all she managed was a whisper. "I don't know what to say." Mr. Nakamura rose, bowing his head with solemn grace. "Say nothing. Just keep speaking the truth when no one else will. That is enough." And then he left as quietly as he had arrived, leaving the photograph on the table, a bridge between past and future. That night, Layla sat awake on the balcony, the photograph in her hands, the city buzzing below. For the first time since the Velvet Ivy dinner, her fear felt smaller than her hope. The world had seen her, and it would never unsee her again. Who throws the first stone? Not the liar, the one who's afraid of the truth. The next morning, the city woke up with bus brakes screeching and headlines slapping the newsstands like wet laundry. Waitress topples billionaire. Two-faced contract, one sentence, worth $500 million. Layla stepped out of the subway like someone just pulled from a burning house. Lungs scorched, eyes raw, heart still running drills. Wind came off the river, pinning her coat to her ribs, sharp as a knife edge. She'd slept 3 hours, soldier's sleep, eyes shut, ears open, body waiting for the next alarm. Outside Velvet Ivy, black SUVs angled across the curb, tinted windows reflecting nothing but trouble. Paparazzi bloomed like weeds, lenses poking the air like spears. Flashbulbs cracked against her eyes. A man in a beanie barked, "Do you regret it?" Another shoved a mic in her face. "Who paid you? Nakamura?" A woman, red-faced, screamed, "You just cost Americans their jobs." Words flew like hailstones. Layla didn't answer. Her mouth locked tight like the last stitch in a wound. She wasn't built for speeches in the street. She was built for slipping past heat. She ducked to the back door, tapped the keypad, and slid inside a hallway that smelled of salt and lemon polish. The kitchen hissed and roared, cast iron pans biting fire, knives rhythmically chopping as if nothing outside existed. Ellis, the head chef, looked up from a cloud of steam. "You holding up?" His voice was too loud, aimed to beat the extractor fan. "You're safe here." But management says you're off the floor. Not fired, just off. Storm's got to pass. Yes, she said. That word fell out of her mouth like a pebble dropped into a well, taking a long time to find bottom. Upstairs, the locker room mirror sweated fog. She tugged open her locker, pulled her purse, and found her phone. The screen was a snowstorm of messages. Classmates she hadn't seen since high school, coworkers, strangers, numbers with no names. Some carried threats in capital letters. Some were apologies for not speaking up sooner. Some were prayers written in digital ink. And buried in the avalanche was her mother's message. Did you eat? Don't worry about me. Cooked my own lunch. Blue sky today. Wear a hat. Layla smiled at that, thin and brittle as tissue paper. She walked home trying to sidestep cameras the way she'd once sidestepped potholes. The city smelled of thawing snow, hot bread from bakeries, and trash sweating in alleys. At the third block, a billboard flared a photo of her face spliced with the contract. Bryant's words crawled in subtitles. She's lying. Beneath it, the chyron oozed. Source: Maxwell Capital Insider. Layla ducked her head. She didn't cry. Her tear ducts had been in drought for days. Her apartment was a one-bedroom L shape with a window that stared at a brick wall. Garlic from her neighbor's pan still clung to the air. Gloria, her mother, was folding laundry on the sofa. Gloria's hands had scrubbed so many floors and ironed so many shirts they'd swollen like buds that never bloomed. She looked up, eyes tired but bright. "Baby," she said, voice steady, "you did the right thing." She didn't pepper her daughter with questions. Women who've survived a lifetime of labor know truth often sits best in silence. Layla nodded. "Yeah, but they're coming." She flicked on the TV. A news anchor smiled like a carving knife. "This story isn't as clean as it looks." On screen, the chyron screamed, "Alleged collusion with Nakamura Holdings." A clip flashed, Layla leaning toward Nakamura, wine bottle in hand, framed to look like a whisper. A panelist sneered. She didn't just happen to know Japanese. "They'll make it dirty, Mama," Layla said, clicking the volume down. "They'll drag mud up to the sun." "Then we wash," Gloria answered, handing her daughter ginger tea, the steam smelling of soil and stubbornness. That afternoon, her phone buzzed with a call marked International. Layla hesitated, then answered. A calm male voice cut across the line, deep and deliberate. "Brooks-san, this is Nakamura. Not an assistant, not a lawyer, the man himself. I've seen the news. Do not worry, truth doesn't run, but it is often pushed." "Thank you," Layla said, shoulders easing a fraction. "My family owes yours a debt," he added, voice weighted like scales settling. "And debts must be paid where they belong." Then the line went quiet, leaving the space filled with more than words. Minutes later, her inbox chimed. Subject: "Proof you're a liar." 3 doctored photos showing her outside a sedan that looked like Nakamura's. Angles bent by long lenses. At the bottom, "Retract or we release." She screen-grabbed the email, sent it to Ellis and the non-profit lawyer who'd taken her case. First thunder of the storm, rolling close. That night, the streets smelled of burnt oil and dirty snow. She ignored the internet. Instead, she pulled out her grandfather's old wooden box. A broken watch strap, some faded stamps, and a photo of his calm eyes. His words echoed in her. "You're the lamp keeper. Don't let dirty wind snuff it out." Fear still sat inside her chest, a black cat curling on her ribs, but it stopped clawing. The second day brought Maxwell's counterstrike. A glossy magazine ran an analysis piece under a fake byline, claiming Layla was a manufactured symbol. The story painted her as a plant by Nakamura, a waitress trained for sympathy. No mention of the $20,000 cash bribe to the translator. No mention of his confession. But money buys ink, and ink buys doubt. Hours later, a Twitter account dumped a cut security clip from Velvet Ivy. Layla pouring wine, leaning close, whispering something. Caption, "Conspiracy in plain sight." A friend texted, "Don't watch." She shoved her phone in a drawer like caging a snake. By evening, the door buzzer rattled. Two agents in long coats, badges glinting. "FBI," one said flatly. "We have some questions." They sat at her kitchen table, water glasses sweating. The woman opened a notebook. "Miss Brooks, did you accept money, gifts, or promises from Nakamura before that night?" "No." Layla's voice stayed steady. "I did my job. I read Japanese. I told the truth." "Where'd you learn it?" the man asked. She told them about her grandfather, about the war letters, about nights spent whispering syllables into silence. The woman studied her, not kindly, not coldly, just measuring. "Maxwell Capital has filed a defamation suit," she added, voice as clinical as a diagnosis. When they left, the apartment felt hollow. Gloria touched her daughter's wrist. "The law's a long road, but it runs straight if you walk straight." That night, her phone lit up. Clark. The translator's voice shook like glassware in an earthquake. I'll hand over the emails, the payments, the instructions. They're threatening me, but fear doesn't last forever." She heard a window bang open in his background, a car speeding past like a stray bullet. "Thank you," she told him. "Truth needs more than one set of arms." Day 3, Maxwell went on national TV. Blue backdrop, red tie, smile polished like a rental car. "I respect my Asian partners," he cooed. This was a misunderstanding. A low-level employee chasing fame. "I forgive her." Forgive. He spat it like a coin dropped in a fake charity bucket. Millions ate their dinner and swallowed the story too. Layla didn't watch. She was in a cramped legal aid office, posters about civil rights peeling from the walls. Her lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman with curls like coiled springs, spread notes across the table. "Tomorrow, SEC hearing. You're not the accused, but they'll try to make you one. 3 rules. Be brief, be exact, don't wrestle in the mud." "I'm scared," Layla admitted, voice small as a breeze. "So am I every time I walk into court," the lawyer said, grinning with grit. "Fear means your nerves are awake." That night, steam from her shower fogged the bathroom mirror until it looked like smoke. She sat on the floor, towel-wrapped, hair dripping, holding one of her grandfather's old notes, kanji scrawled in uneven hand. "Words are bridges. Good men build them. Bad men burn them." She pressed it to her chest, listening to her heart knock against the paper. Morning broke sharp and white. Snow-powdered rooftops like spilled sugar. Layla wrapped her scarf, pulled on boots, and didn't flinch at the cameras waiting by the curb. The FBI car waiting for her was quiet, respectful. She rode through streets where janitors shoveled, writing letters in the snow with their shovels. The city didn't love anyone, but it respected the ones awake before dawn. The federal building was a slab of cold stone. Inside, metal detectors hummed, elevators swallowed, witnesses, halls smelled of paper and disinfectant. The hearing room had no jury, just a long table, microphones glowing red, recorders blinking. At the far end, Maxwell sat in his confident suit, smirk stitched back on. He glanced at her, smile thin as a razor. "Miss Brooks," a commissioner said, voice flat as drywall. "Thank you for appearing. Tell us what you saw." Layla looked at the microphone like a well. Her voice cracked at first, then smoothed out. She laid it plain. The wine. The word Bombi, the contract clause, the kanji. Each word placed on the table like a brick, straight, no ornament. Maxwell's lawyer pounced. Do you have a degree in Japanese? No. Did Nakamura pay you? No. Do you have any personal vendetta against my client? Silence stretched, then she said, Yes. I like the truth. The room shifted. A clerk hid a smile. The lawyer sneered, Do you realize the consequences? Thousands of shareholders? People don't destroy markets by telling the truth, she said. They destroy them by writing lies. When it ended, the hallway stretched like a brass trumpet. And waiting by the elevator was Clark, thin, eyes hidden under a gray cap. I handed it in, he said, voice raw. Emails, transfers, orders. Fear's done with me. Outside, reporters swarmed. One shouted, Do you regret it? Layla thought of her grandfather's letters, her mother's tired hands, the sting of Bambi in her ears. She lifted her chin. No, she said, clear enough to ride the wind. I don't regret reading a line correctly. That night, the city hummed softer. She sat by her window, staring at the same brick wall. Her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. Tomorrow at 9 o'clock, evidence will be released. Don't be afraid. She didn't know who sent it, but she knew the smell of morning when it's on its way. Ink, paper, and truth about to grow legs. And somewhere across town, Bryant Maxwell stared at his reflection in glass. Red tie, swollen eyes, a smile gone missing. He dialed number after number. No one answered, and for the first time, silence didn't serve him. Layla pulled her curtains closed, turned off the light. In the dark, her heartbeat wasn't an alarm anymore. It was the steady step of a lampkeeper. And the lies, once etched in ink, were starting to shiver. How many wolves does it take to corner a lamb? Just one, if the lamb forgets it has teeth. The morning after her testimony, New York wore its winter mask, slush piled like dirty sugar, wind tunneling down the avenues with no regard for human bones. Layla pulled her scarf higher, shoulders hunched. Every step toward the subway felt like walking against a current, the city itself testing whether she'd turn back. At the kiosk, tabloids screamed, Maxwell fires back. Waitress or weapon? One paper ran her photo side by side with Nakamura's, a red question mark between them like a wound. The caption, Secret, Alliance? Passers-by skimmed, shrugged, dropped quarters. For them, it was entertainment. For her, it was oxygen on a slow burn. She slipped underground, found a corner of the subway car, pressed back against cold metal. A teenage boy across from her whispered to his friend, loud enough for her to catch, That's her. The friend looked, then shook his head. Nay, she wouldn't be on the train if she was rich now. Layla almost laughed. If only the world worked with that kind of logic. By the time she reached the legal aid office, her lawyer Marisol already had 2 newspapers spread across the table, highlighter scars marking phrases like fabricated hero and paid pawn. Marisol's curls frizzed with static, her coffee untouched. They're coming with knives out, she said without preamble. Maxwell's lawyers just filed for a restraining order to prevent you from speaking to media. They're trying to gag you before the next SEC session. Layla sat, the cheap plastic chair squeaking. Can they? They can try. And they will smear while they do it. But here's the thing, Marisol tapped the highlighted article. You don't fight lies by chasing everyone. You let the truth pile high enough to bury them. Clark's evidence is gold, and more is coming. Layla rubbed her temples. The ginger tea from last night had worn off. All that remained was a dull headache, the kind that carried its own shadow. That afternoon, she and Marisol climbed the courthouse steps, marble slick from melted snow. Inside, cameras waited like vultures. The hearing room brimmed with suits, rows of men in charcoal and navy, ties neat as choke collars. Maxwell sat at the front, his tie once again red, his smile polished back into existence. He rose when called, voice smooth as butter on warm bread. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not about truth. This is about theatrics. A young woman misread a document beyond her comprehension. My company has built wealth for thousands of families. We don't play games with foreign partners. We don't gamble with trust. He leaned forward, lowering his voice like a preacher at the pulpit. If we let every server with a word of Japanese decide the fate of markets, chaos would reign. The gallery murmured. Some nodded. Others frowned. Layla sat stone still. The words slid over her skin like oil, hard to catch, harder to wash. When it was her turn, the commissioner asked gently, "Miss Brooks, do you have anything to add?" She stood. Her knees trembled, but her voice didn't. "I didn't gamble, I read." The room stilled. "I didn't misread, I spoke what was there. And the only chaos I've seen is the kind Mr. Maxwell hired translators to hide a stir, sharper this time." Maxwell's jaw ticked. His lawyer leapt up, barking objections, but the commissioner waved them down. The rest of the session blurred. Motions, counter-motions, legal jargon bouncing like tennis balls. No one wanted to catch. But when it adjourned, Layla knew the tide had shifted. Not one, not safe, but shifted. Outside, the sky had bruised purple, snowflakes spitting sideways. Reporters lunged. A woman thrust a mic close. "Miss Brooks, do you consider yourself a whistleblower?" Layla paused on the steps, breath visible. She thought of her grandfather's words, "Bridges, not weapons." "No," she said finally. "I consider myself someone who knows the difference between a lie and the truth." And I couldn't stay quiet. The clip aired that night, raw, unpolished, her voice cutting through polished spin like grit in a fine mill. It didn't trend, but it traveled. Across social feeds, in late-night emails, in whispered kitchen conversations, it spread. And sometimes, quiet travels farther than thunder. But thunder was still coming. The next morning, Maxwell's machine unleashed its real counterpunch. A video dropped online, cut and edited with surgeon's cruelty. Layla, pouring wine, leaning close, lips moving. Subtitles plastered across the bottom. "Stick with me, and you'll be rewarded." It was fake, but slick enough to fool tired eyes. Within hours, the hashtag Layla the Liar trended. Comment sections boiled. Death threats arrived, written in all caps, punctuated with gun emojis. Gloria unplugged the landline after midnight calls rattled the apartment. "You can't go outside alone," she said, face tight, hands folding and unfolding. "I can't stop living either," Layla replied, voice low. She didn't believe it fully, but saying it gave the words some backbone. That afternoon, Clark appeared at the office again, pale, shaking, clutching a folder fat with printed emails. "Here," he croaked, dropping it on the table. "Payment receipts. Instructions. It's all here." His eyes darted like trapped birds. "They'll come after me now." "They already are," Marisol said. "But you did the right thing." Layla touched his arm lightly. Not forgiveness. It wasn't hers to give, but recognition. 2 days later, the SEC called another hearing, this time with Clark testifying. He spoke haltingly, shame dripping from each word, but truth flowing all the same. When he confirmed the $20,000 cash, gasps broke the room. Cameras blinked red, recording every syllable. Maxwell sat rigid. Smile finally cracked. By the end, the commissioners announced an expanded investigation into Maxwell Capital's practices, both domestic and overseas. For the first time, the man who conquered rooms couldn't stop the walls from closing in. That night, Layla sat by her window, staring at the brick wall across the alley. Snow clung stubbornly to ledges. Her phone buzzed. A new message, number unknown. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. evidence release. Don't be afraid. She didn't know the sender, but she recognized the feeling in her chest, the one her grandfather used to call the heartbeat of truth. It wasn't calm. It wasn't peace. It was the steady drum of something alive, something waiting to march. And across town, in his penthouse glass cage, Bryant Maxwell dialed contact after contact. The city reflected back in his windows like shards. No one answered. For the first time, silence didn't bend to him. How loud does the truth have to shout before a city hears it? By 8:57 a.m., the sidewalk outside the old Federal Post Office, now reborn as a glass-ribbed civic hall, was a river of breath turning to steam. Vans idled double-parked, dish antenna spines flexing against the iron sky. Reporters clutched microphones like cold birds. The wind came down Broadway with a blade in it, slicing open collars, making eyes water until everyone looked halfway to tears. Layla stood at the edge of it all, with her scarf pulled up and her hands jammed into the pockets of a borrowed wool coat. The text, tomorrow, 9 a.m., evidence release. Don't be afraid, had hummed in her palm all night like a trapped bee. She'd shown it to Marisol, who'd only said, "We go. We don't blink." Then she'd slept on the couch, shoes by the door, as if sleep might have to sprint. At 8:59, a black sedan slid to the curb. Not a limousine, not a statement, just a handsome car driven by someone who didn't like attention. The rear door opened, and a man in a gray overcoat stepped into the exhaust haze. He wasn't Nakamura, too young, too American casual in the way he held his shoulders. He scanned the crowd once, then locked onto Layla like a compass needle finding north. "Miss." "Brooks," he said softly, stopping close enough that his breath ribboned into hers. "Name's Eli Cho. I manage systems security for a firm you've come to know too well." "Maxwell," she said, and felt something steady inside. "Names are anchors." He nodded. "Not for much longer. I have a flash drive and a signed affidavit, internal server mirrors, payment trails, voice memos he thought he erased. He didn't. "Why me?" Layla asked. The question lived in her marrow now. "Because you started this without permission," Eli said. "Because you said the quiet part out loud and didn't die. That tends to attract the right kind of coward's courage." He held up a gloved hand, a slim black drive pinched between finger and thumb. "And because I'm done being the lock on a bad door." Inside the hall, the air smelled of old paper and lemon oil, like confidence and archives. The city had dressed the place with flags and patience. On the dais, a line of commissioners adjusted their microphones. That ritual of power and the murmur tilled the room. Maxwell's side filled rows with silk and posture. Their red ties were a semaphore. "We still command the weather." Layla took her seat behind the witness rail with Marisol to her left, Eli to her right. His jaw ticked like a small metronome, the only thing in him that looked afraid. When the gavel touched wood, it didn't so much bang as decide. The lead commissioner, a woman whose hair had gone white with the efficiency of winter, looked over her spectacles. We understand there are new materials. Marisol rose. There are, Madam Chair. She nodded to Eli. He stood, his hands perfectly still. I am submitting a sworn statement, chain of custody documentation, and a drive containing 721 files sourced from internal servers and personal devices belonging to Maxwell Capital executives. The relevant items are indexed, password protected with a key delivered to counsel. Maxwell didn't stand. He leaned back in his chair and smiled his magazine smile, the one with all the little knives tucked behind it. Forgive me, he said, voice silk on stone. We're now taking evidence from disgruntled IT staff. The circus expands. No one laughed. The commissioners conferred without their mouths. The chair tapped the drive with a pen as if testing a plank over a ravine. We will accept the materials pending forensic verification. Mr. Cho, is there anything you wish to say beyond your affidavit? Eli's mouth opened, closed. He swallowed once. Only this. I watched good people get smaller for a living. I wrote the code that made the dark neat. I don't want to do that anymore. The chair nodded, and something older than law passed between them. They recessed for 90 minutes. In that time, the drive's spine was read, mirrored, measured. Teams in rooms above this one leaned into screens, lips moving without sound. Downstairs, the lobby filled with coffee and nervous laughter. The marble floor held footprints that melted and reappeared as if everyone kept walking in and out of the same wet river. Layla stood by a radiator that hissed like a cat. Gloria arrived out of breath and buttons, cheeks pinked by the cold. She wrapped both hands around Layla's, their knuckles bone-white. I brought you almonds, she whispered, producing a crinkled bag with ceremony. Because you forget to eat when you worry. Layla smiled so wide it hurt. I'm eating now. You are, Gloria said, chin up like a general who'd brought ammunition. The room changed at 11:22 a.m. The way a field changes when birds lift together. You don't see the signal, you just see the air tilt. People began moving back toward the chamber, eyes glossy from screens. A journalist hustled past, muttering, he recorded his own threats, as if reporting on weather no one had invented. Back on the benches, you could feel the temperature drop from anticipation. The chair cleared her throat. The preliminary review reveals extensive material. We will speak to what is clear. She folded the first page and began. There were emails uncluttered as lists. There were transfers nicknamed with jokes. There were memos marked leverage that read like prayers to a greedy God. And then there were the recordings. Short ones, the kind you make when you think a phone is only a glass mirror for your face. In one, Maxwell's voice came lazy over the room's speakers, a drawl dipped in varnish. Make their language do the work. If they balk, we blame an intern. If they sign, we own the floor they stand on. In another, pay the translator in cash. Hire a cleaner to hire the cleaner. Plausible deniability isn't a shield, it's a costume. It wasn't a dagger. It was a box of them opened. Maxwell's smile held for the first recording, then thinned. By the fourth, his knuckles went white. By the sixth, he stood abruptly. This is illegal, he spat, and the silk fell away. Stolen. Out of context. I won't sit while enemies... You will, the chair said. Not loud, not cruel. Her voice had the gravity of a rock at the bottom of a river. And you will remember where you are. That afternoon bled into evening without anyone noticing the light change. Outside, the sky lowered. Inside, the truth rose and rose until even people who didn't want to be wet had to admit they were standing in rain. Midway through, an unexpected hinge turned. A woman in a navy dress, Maxwell's executive assistant, the one who never looked up from the iPad, stood from the back row and asked permission to speak. Her name was Yara Mendieta, and her voice carried an accent soft as a shawl. Andalusian vowels warmed by New York steam. "I booked the rooms," she said without ornament. "I sent the car. I ordered the cash from Petty. I told myself it was work." She looked down, then up again with the slow courage of someone standing up inside her own life. "I also kept my own calendar. With notes. I have uploaded it to the commission, along with time-stamped photos of the altered contract drafts. My father taught me to write things down when my boss lies." Maxwell's head snapped toward her like a dog hearing thunder. "Yara," he said, a warning threaded with disbelief. She didn't sit. "Sir," she answered, and in that single syllable drained him of a title he had not deserved for years. By 5 o'clock, the room smelled like wool and adrenaline. The chair announced the obvious. The investigation would expand to criminal referral, travel documents would be flagged, subpoenas were already in flight. Mercy would not be the first words spoken here. Outside, the evening had mislaid the sun. A wet snow began that wasn't loyal enough to stick. Reporters pulsed like a single organism under the portico, the arc lights bleaching faces into theater masks. When Layla stepped into it, microphones angled. Questions struck like sleet. "Do you feel vindicated?" someone shouted. She blinked against the brightness. "I feel tired," she said, and people laughed because they recognized the truest answer in the room. "Are you afraid?" another asked. She thought of the prank calls, the edited clip, the messages promising harm spelled wrong. She thought of almonds in her pocket, of her mother's hand in hers, of Eli's. Metronome jaw finally still. "Yes," she said, "but I'm standing here anyway." They found space for her words that night. The internet threw up less bile than usual, as if a tide had slackened. The fake video that had dogged her for days got recut by some quiet stranger with timestamps and overlays. Here is where the audio jumps. Here is where her lips don't match the sounds. It didn't trend. It didn't have to. It moved like water under a house, undoing the rot. That should have been enough for a day. But stories don't end neatly just because our bodies ask them to. In the concrete belly of the parking garage, the air tasted of pennies and old rain. Layla and Gloria walked toward the elevator, their steps echoing in twos. Marisol had sprinted back upstairs for a forgotten folder. Eli had peeled off to file a copy with an agent too careful to email. The level was dim and not empty. A man stepped out from behind a pillar, shadow unbuttoning into a face. Maxwell. No entourage, no suit jacket, tie slack as a flag after parade. The red looked ridiculous down here, where colors minded their manners. "Miss Brooks," he said. The voice had grit in it now, the kind that comes from a throat rubbed raw by explaining yourself to people who don't believe you anymore. "A word." Gloria moved without thinking, putting herself between them. Layla touched her mother's elbow, a small migration. "It's okay," she said, not to Maxwell. "It isn't," Maxwell smiled, and for the first time all week, his smile had the honesty of a broken thing. "Nothing is okay." "Which might be your point." He took a step closer. His cologne, something woody and expensive, rode over the metal. "You think integrity wins?" "It doesn't. It haunts. You'll see. Your life will never be quiet again." Layla felt her heart rise to her throat and then, surprisingly, drop back into place. She pictured the dining room the first night, the orchids too white, the knives too heavy. The moment she'd said, "That's not what it says," and the room had turned to see who dared. She thought of her grandfather's hands in an old sepia photo, dirt in the lines and peace in the gaze. She heard herself answer before she decided on words. "Quiet isn't the same as right." Maxwell's eyes flashed, then dulled. "Enjoy your 15 minutes, he said. It was a line he'd practiced 1,000 times for other people. It sounded threadbare on him now. Footsteps rattled behind. 2 agents in dark coats emerged from the swing door, voices crisp with the relief of finding the thing they'd been sent to fetch. "Mr. Maxwell," one called, "we have some paperwork for you." The phrasing was pleasant as a menu. The posture was not. He didn't run. He didn't fight. He was a man who had run and fought so long that the act of standing still read as a revolution he could not afford. He held Layla's gaze one fraction longer than politeness allows. "You'll miss me," he said, and it was the saddest thing she'd ever heard him say, because the city had already forgotten him. They watched him go, the agent's hands light on his elbows. No cuffs, not yet. Justice is a machine that chews at its own pace. In the elevator up, Gloria leaned her head on the metal wall and blew out a breath that rolled her cheeks. "I am too old for parking garage drama," she announced to the lighted buttons. Layla laughed then, a sound that surprised her with how much breath it took. It filled the small space and stayed there when the doors opened. Days folded. The papers stopped calling the scandal an alleged scheme and started calling it what it was. Maxwell's board posted a terse statement on the company site, then another. Then, without his name, announced leadership changes and cooperation. Investors who had once begged for lunch learned to love breakfast somewhere else. On a Wednesday that did not know it was important, a white envelope arrived at their apartment with no return address, only a fine black script, Ms. Layla Brooks. Inside, a single photograph. The sepia, one of 2 young men in the ruins, the crease mended with archival tape. In a letter handwritten in a slanted hand. "Your grandfather saved mine. He believed kindness could survive fire. You proved him right with words instead of water. Our family's debt is not paid by money, but we will not be stingy with it where it can do good. Please accept the enclosed as a beginning, not an end." There was a second envelope within the first, blue as a lake. Gloria opened it, hands trembling. A scholarship certificate for Layla, embossed, full tuition and living expenses for an international program of her choosing. A second sheet, employment terms for Gloria at a community office already rented on 110th. Salary and benefits more generous than the world usually gives women who have cleaned its teeth marks off floors for decades. They stood at the kitchen counter, elbows touching, the late light making squares on the laminate. Layla pressed the photo flat with her palm, feeling the old paper heat under her skin. Across 70 years, her grandfather looked up at her like he'd been waiting. That night, she slept hard for the first time since the restaurant, the kind of sleep that isn't escape but repair. When dawn came, it came ordinary. Garbage trucks singing their metal songs, a dog insisting the morning belonged to it, someone, 2 buildings, over practicing scales on a trumpet like they meant it. She made tea. She answered a text from Marisol with a single word, "Thanks," and another from Eli, with a plan to deliver a statement before he left the city for a while. She listened to the kettle wheeze down and thought, not about fame or punishment or the churn of strangers' opinions, but about translation. Her grandfather had said, Language is how you understand a man's heart. She was beginning to suspect it's also how you understand your own. What you refuse to say, what you say anyway, what you learn to say without asking someone bigger for permission. Outside, early sunlight spilled down the face of the building across the street and found her window. It landed on the photograph on the table and turned the soldiers' uniforms the color of warm bread. She touched the edge once more, then carried it to the wall and taped it above the small desk where tonight she would draft the first application of her new life. It would not be a press release, and it would not be to a university. It would be a letter in careful English and respectful Japanese to an old man in Tokyo whose grandson had bowed in a room of men and said honor out loud. She would tell him that debts between families do not end, they become bridges, and bridges are for crossing. On her way out the door, she grabbed the bag of almonds. She tucked them into her coat pocket and stepped into the day with her shoulders square and her breath visible. A woman who had walked through a storm and found that, yes, the city hears the truth just fine. It just needs someone to say it in a voice that doesn't shake, or shakes and speaks anyway. The news broke like a glass dropped in the middle of Sunday service. Sharp, shocking, impossible to ignore. By Monday morning, every business channel from Bloomberg to the free TVs in airport lounges carried the same footage on repeat. Bryant Maxwell, once the slick darling of Wall Street, being escorted down the marble steps of his own headquarters by federal agents. No handcuffs. White-collar suspects rarely get that indignity, but the set of his jaw and the red blotch creeping up his neck told the story just fine. He was finished, cooked like yesterday's steak, and the whole world got to watch him cool on the plate. Layla watched it too, though not from a penthouse or a trading floor. She sat on the edge of her mother's thrift store couch, her legs folded beneath her, the TV light flickering across her face. Gloria sat beside her, one hand wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee, the other clutching the hem of her daughter's sleeve as if the world might snatch her away now that it knew her name. "There it is," Gloria whispered, her voice a blend of awe and disbelief. "You toppled him. You really did." Layla didn't answer right away. She was too busy feeling the weight in her chest shift. For weeks she had carried fear like a brick in her lungs, fear of losing her job, of being smeared, of disappearing into silence. Now that brick was gone, replaced with something she barely recognized, possibility. The cameras didn't follow Bryant past the curb. They never show you the part where a man goes home alone, where the expensive suit comes off and the phone stops ringing. But Layla imagined it anyway. She imagined him pacing in his penthouse, raging at the silence that used to answer his calls with "yes, sir." She almost pitied him. Almost. By Tuesday, the story had moved beyond scandal into something closer to folklore. Waitress exposes $500 million fraud, blared across headlines. Social media minted hashtags out of her name. Pundits chewed on it like a tough cut of meat, each one claiming they knew what it meant. Some called her a hero of integrity. Others dismissed her as a lucky nobody who stumbled into a boardroom battle. The truth, as always, was simpler and harder. She had just opened her mouth when everyone else kept theirs shut. And now, the world wouldn't stop talking. The first call came from a number she didn't recognize, New York area code. She almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "Miss Brooks?" The voice was warm, deliberate, with the faintest trace of an accent she recognized from that night. "This is Kenji Nakamura." She nearly dropped the phone. For a moment, words jammed in her throat. She managed, "Yes, sir." "Please, no titles," he said gently. "You gave my family back something we thought lost. For that, I owe you more than thanks. The foundation would like to extend to you a scholarship, full tuition, housing, living expenses, at any university you choose. You will not need to carry trays again unless you want to." Layla pressed her palm to her eyes, steadying herself. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Nakamura replied, "and then study well. The world needs more voices that do not stay silent." She hung up and turned to her mother. Gloria didn't ask what the call was about. She didn't need to. Tears were already sliding down her cheeks. For the first time in years, their apartment felt too small for the size of their lives. The peeling paint and humming radiator belonged to the days of scraping by, of counting tips like rations. But now there was air to breathe, space to imagine. By the end of the week, another offer arrived. Not just for Layla, but for Gloria. A position in the Nakamura Foundation's New York office, working in community outreach. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest, salaried, with benefits her mother had never once enjoyed in decades of cleaning other people's kitchens. Gloria stared at the letter like it was a foreign language, mouthing each line as if afraid it would vanish if she read too fast. "I've never had health insurance," she murmured, almost to herself. "Not once." Layla slid her arms around her mother's shoulders. "You do now." That night, they packed their first box, not because they had to move immediately, but because it felt good to prepare for a life that wasn't shrinking anymore. Still, victory had its price. Fame was a stubborn shadow, one Layla hadn't invited but couldn't shake. Paparazzi lingered outside Velvet Ivy. Reporters left business cards wedged in her mailbox. A documentary crew pitched a feature about the waitress who brought down Wall Street's golden boy. She turned them all away. She didn't want to be a spectacle. She wanted a chance to live. But anonymity was gone. Strangers stopped her on the street to thank her. Others sneered, muttering about how she'd ruined American business. Online, her face appeared in memes, sometimes as a saint, sometimes as a joke. The noise was constant, like static in her ears. On Thursday, she ducked into a corner deli for milk. The cashier, a teenager with earbuds dangling, glanced up and froze. "Hey, you're that girl." From the news, his tone was equal parts awe and suspicion. Layla forced a small smile. "Just trying to buy milk?" The kid grinned sheepishly and rang her up. But as she left, she caught a whisper from the line behind her. "That's her? Looks normal. Thought she'd be taller." She walked faster, the bag swinging at her side. Heroism, she was learning, doesn't make groceries cheaper or whispers kinder. At night, though, when the city quieted, she let herself imagine the future. Columbia University had accepted her transfer application, fast-tracked after Nakamura's call. She would start in the fall, majoring in international relations. She pictured herself walking across campus with books pressed to her chest, no tray in sight, no heels blistering her feet. She pictured her mother sitting at a real desk in a real office, answering calls that mattered. And always, she pictured the photograph Nakamura had shown her, the black and white snapshot of her grandfather beside a Japanese soldier. Both boys then, both smiling in the ruins of war. That photo lived in her nightstand now, tucked under a lamp that buzzed faintly. She touched it each morning like a talisman. It reminded her that honor doesn't wear suits or carry business cards. Sometimes it carries a tray, sometimes it speaks in a borrowed tongue. Meanwhile, Bryant Maxwell's empire collapsed with the speed of a sandcastle at high tide. Investors pulled out. Board members distanced themselves. Politicians deleted photos they'd once boasted about. He tried to launch a counter-offensive, press statements, legal threats, but none of it stuck. Clark, the translator he'd bribed, had cut a deal with investigators, handing over emails, receipts, everything. The SEC announced a formal indictment. Fraud, bribery, conspiracy. Each charge landed like another nail in a coffin that once looked bulletproof. Layla didn't celebrate. She didn't need to. Watching a man unravel in public wasn't joy. It was simply justice catching up. But she did breathe easier. The shadow that had loomed so large now looked smaller, pitiful even. One evening, weeks later, she and her mother stood on the tiny balcony of their new apartment on the Upper West Side. It wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, sunlight streaming in the mornings, a balcony just wide enough for 2 chairs. But it was theirs. Gloria had planted herbs in little clay pots, basil, mint, rosemary, her hands always finding soil to tend, even in a city of concrete. Below, traffic hummed, horns blared, life carried on. Above, the sky stretched wide, painted orange by the setting sun. "You know," Gloria said softly, "your grandfather would have loved this. Not the apartment, not the city. The fight. He'd have been proud that you didn't stay quiet." Layla leaned against the railing, the cool metal pressing into her arms. "Sometimes I wonder if I made it harder than it needed to be. If I should have just stayed in my place." Her mother turned, eyes steady. "Staying quiet isn't easier, baby. It just costs more later. You spoke when it counted. That's rare. That's everything." Layla swallowed hard, her throat tight. She didn't have an answer, only the night air filling her lungs, cool and sharp, reminding her she was still here, still moving forward. That was how the new chapter began. Not with champagne toasts or parades, but with boxes unpacked in a modest apartment, scholarship forms signed in blue ink, and a mother humming over a pot of herbs. The world still roared outside, demanding stories, headlines, opinions. But inside, in their small corner of New York, there was quiet. And for the first time in her memory, quiet didn't mean defeat, it meant peace. The first real silence came 2 weeks later, on a Saturday morning when the headlines had moved on. Layla woke to the smell of coffee and the low hum of her mother's radio playing gospel in the kitchen. No reporters outside, no calls buzzing her phone. Just morning light spilling across her quilt, warm and ordinary. She lay still for a long moment, listening to the city stretch itself awake. Sirens far off, dogs barking, someone dragging a stubborn trash can down the block. The noise of New York, yes, but not directed at her. For the first time in months, she wasn't the story. She made herself a cup of tea and carried it out onto the little balcony. The plants her mother tended were thriving, green shoots reaching toward the sky. She touched a sprig of rosemary, inhaled its sharp scent, and felt something loosen inside her. Maybe healing smelled like this, earthy, alive, persistent. Classes at Columbia began that fall. Layla walked onto campus with her backpack slung over one shoulder, a notebook tucked under her arm, and the kind of nerves that belong to beginnings. She half expected people to point, to whisper, but students were too busy rushing to lectures or scrolling their phones. To them, she was just another face in the crowd. And that anonymity was the sweetest gift. Still, she couldn't quite escape the shadow of her story. A professor in her international relations seminar pulled her aside after the first week. "Miss Brooks," he said, peering over his glasses, "I read about you. What you did, speaking truth across languages. That is diplomacy in its rawest form. Don't underestimate what it means." She flushed, mumbled something polite, and hurried out. But his words stayed with her. Maybe her life hadn't just swerved by accident. Maybe it had revealed where she was meant to go. Meanwhile, Bryant Maxwell's empire continued to unravel. Court hearings dragged his name across headlines with the rhythm of a drumbeat. Investors lined up to testify against him. Former allies leaked emails and memos. The man who once measured his worth in magazine covers now measured it in legal motions and bail conditions. Layla caught glimpses of him on the news. Older, heavier, the polish gone from his smile. She felt no triumph, only a faint ache of recognition. Power had made him believe he was untouchable. Truth had proved otherwise. And though she knew he would fight until the last dollar was gone, the outcome felt certain. Empires built on deception don't stand forever. One evening in October, Layla received an invitation from the Nakamura Foundation, a gala, they called it, though the word felt too shiny for her. She nearly declined, but Gloria insisted. "You can't hide from good things," her mother said, pressing the card back into her hands. "You earned this." So she went. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers and polished marble, the kind of place where shoes clicked like punctuation. Layla wore a simple navy dress borrowed from a friend, her curls pinned back, her hands damp with nerves. When she entered, conversations paused, heads turned. For a second she wanted to shrink, to disappear like she used to at Velvet Ivy. Then she saw Kenji Nakamura. He was speaking with a cluster of donors, but when his eyes found hers, he excused himself and crossed the room with the dignity of a man carrying both history and gratitude. "Miss Brooks," he said, bowing slightly, "I am pleased you came." Layla returned the bow, awkward but sincere. "Thank you for everything." He shook his head. "Do not thank me. You honored truth. My family merely honored a debt." He gestured toward the stage where a large screen displayed photographs of the foundation's work. Schools built, wetlands restored, patients funded. This is what honor does when it is given room to breathe. As the evening went on, Layla found herself speaking with scholars, activists, translators. For once, she wasn't the waitress in the corner or the headline on a screen. She was part of something larger, a current of people who believed words could move the world. When she left that night, a cool wind tugging at her dress, she felt lighter. The story wasn't about her anymore. It was about what she could do next. Back at home, life settled into a new rhythm. Gloria rose early for her job at the foundation, answering calls with the calm of someone who finally had security under her feet. She came home humming, her shoulders no longer hunched from scrubbing other people's floors. Layla studied late into the night, her desk cluttered with textbooks and highlighted notes. Some evenings, she and her mother cooked together, filling the apartment with the smell of garlic and onions, laughter spilling louder than the pan sizzling. Other nights, they sat quietly, the television flickering, comfortable in the kind of silence that once felt impossible. They framed the old black and white photograph of Henry Brooks and Satoru Nakamura. It hung in the living room, centered above the couch. Every visitor paused at it, some asking, some just staring. To Layla, it was a compass, a reminder that courage doesn't vanish. It passes down hand to hand like an heirloom no one can pawn. By winter, the city had learned a new story. Not about fraud or scandal, but about rebuilding. News outlets stopped calling Layla for interviews. The paparazzi drifted off to chase fresher prey. Her name still lived online, but it was no longer shouted in anger or awe. It had become part of the fabric, a thread in a larger tapestry of voices that refused silence. One snowy evening, walking back from class, Layla paused on the steps of Columbia's library. The campus glowed under street lamps, snowflakes tumbling like feathers. She pulled out her phone and opened the photo Nakamura had given her. Her grandfather, young and resolute, stared back. She whispered into the cold air, "I hope I made you proud," and in that moment, she felt he had answered. Not with words, but with the steady warmth that rose in her chest. That was how the story of Layla Brooks settled, not with fireworks, but with roots. Not with headlines, but with the quiet dignity of a family finally standing tall. And though the city would remember her as the waitress who spoke 5 words that toppled a billionaire, she knew herself differently. She was a student, a daughter, a granddaughter, carrying a torch lit decades ago in the rubble of war. The rest of her story was still unwritten, but for the first time, she trusted herself to write it.